Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a high-stakes corporate drama that's unfolding right now over the future of electric vehicle manufacturing in Canada. We've got ambitious newcomers aggressively entering the market, entrenched legacy giants sounding the alarm, and a government desperately trying to keep everybody happy while securing its economic future. It's a fascinating tug-of-war, and we're going to break down exactly what's happening.
Okay, let's dive right into this. The core question driving this entire situation is pretty huge. Can Canada successfully invite the world's most aggressive, fast-moving EV makers to set up shop inside its borders without completely jeopardizing its own deeply entrenched auto industry? Look, Canada knows it needs EV manufacturing to stay relevant, especially with the uncertainty of the U.S. trade review kind of looming over everything. But by courting these new manufacturers, they seriously risk angering the legacy Japanese automakers who have literally been the backbone of Canadian auto manufacturing for decades. It's a remarkably delicate wager.
So, to untangle this massive trade conflict, here's our roadmap. First, the Chinese EV invasion. Second, Canada's Build Where You Sell framework. Third, the pushback from legacy automakers. And finally, Canada's delicate balancing act. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. The Chinese EV Invasion. The catalyst for this whole drama really starts with Industry Minister Melanie Joly, who is actively courting 4 major Chinese EV manufacturers to build a new lifeline for Canada's domestic auto industry. Now, what's really interesting here is the number 49,000. That's the strict quota of Chinese electric vehicles allowed into Canada this year. But, as Minister Joly noted, these 4 companies, BYD, Chery, Geely, and Shanghai Launch Automotive Technology, they are aggressively looking to expand well beyond this cap. They don't just want to hit the limit, they want to open the market entirely. So how do we even arrive at this very specific 49,000 vehicle cap in the first place?
Well, it actually stems from a pretty surprising geopolitical trade-off. Earlier this year, during a trip to Beijing by Mark Carney, Canada agreed to allow up to these 49,000 Chinese EVs into the country under a significantly reduced tariff of just 6.1%. And what did Canada get in return? China agreed to lift retaliatory tariffs on certain Canadian agricultural products. So right out of the gate, we're seeing just how interconnected the global trade landscape really is. I mean, we're literally trading cars for crops.
Which brings us to Section 2, Build Where You Sell. Canada definitely wants these companies to expand, for sure, but Minister Joly is setting up this sort of Trojan horse framework to control exactly how that expansion happens.
So the crucial point here is that she's not just throwing the doors wide open. To act as a defensive shield, she insisted on 4 strict pillars. First, if these Chinese EV makers want to manufacture in Canada, the assembly plant has to be set up as a joint venture with majority Canadian ownership. Second, they absolutely must use Canadian supplies. Third, they have to abide by Canadian labor codes. And fourth, they need to ensure rock-solid data security. Let's actually zoom in on that last point because it is absolutely critical for today's modern vehicles.
This is a massive sticking point in the negotiations. Canada is demanding an absolute ironclad guarantee that user data collected by the vehicle will not be transferred to the Chinese government. The specific fear is what happens when everyday drivers connect their personal cell phones to the car's infotainment system. With modern espionage fears running high and data privacy being paramount, Canada is drawing a hard line in the sand about where that sync data ends up. For everyday consumers, this is about ensuring that the texts, contacts, and maps from your phone don't suddenly become state secrets abroad.
All right, let's move on and see how this builds in Section 3, Legacy Automakers Pushback. Because while Minister Joly implies that positive conversations are happening, traditional Japanese auto manufacturers operating in Canada are raising some really serious vocal alarms.
Just listen to this remarkably blunt assessment from Kenichi Kawaji, the president and CEO of Mitsubishi Motor Sales of Canada. He freely admits that Chinese EVs are, quote, very nice, and praises their amazing exterior and interior technology combined with a highly competitive price tag. He flat out states it will be difficult to fight. Now, interestingly, Kawaji noted that the only reason he doesn't expect an immediate surge in Chinese EV sales is simply because Canada doesn't currently have the short-term charging infrastructure to support them. So it's essentially a temporary reprieve based on a lack of charging plugs, not a lack of consumer demand.
And this brilliantly illustrates the crazy juxtaposition happening in the market right now. On one side, you've got new Chinese entrants bringing aggressive expansion with low-cost, super high-tech, fully electric vehicles.
On the other side, you have legacy brands like Mitsubishi, who notably don't even have a manufacturing plant in North America, retreating to a strategy of adapting by investing more in hybrid alternatives. It's like two vastly different approaches to the automotive future colliding in the Canadian market. And for the everyday car buyer, it's setting up an inevitable clash between affordable new tech and familiar hybrid reliability.
But, if Mitsubishi was blunt, Honda is practically throwing haymakers here. Dave Jamieson, the president of Honda Canada, recently pointed directly at policy decisions, explicitly calling out the rising competition from what he describes as low-cost, state-subsidized, non-market-oriented producers. He is squarely blaming these new entrants and the government policies that are allowing them in for actively threatening their business and warping the entire competitive landscape. And Honda's harsh words are deeply grounded in real-world macroeconomic pain. This isn't just talk. Honda recently recorded $15 billion in global losses. Because of that, along with U.S. tariff exposure and trade uncertainty under the current trade review, they have indefinitely shelved their plans to build EVs at their massive plant in Alliston, Ontario. So when Honda complains about these new state-subsidized entrants making the environment uncompetitive, there are billion-dollar investments and thousands of local jobs literally hanging in the balance.
Which leads us perfectly into our final section, Canada's delicate balancing act. The government is effectively attempting to play referee between these two completely different automotive giants. To really grasp the sheer scale of what's at stake here, consider this: 75%. 75% of all vehicles currently assembled in Canada are made at either Toyota or Honda plants. That is 3/4 of the entire domestic assembly. This breakdown shows exactly why upsetting these legacy automakers is so incredibly dangerous for the Canadian economy. The government absolutely cannot afford to have these companies pack up and devastate the local communities that rely on these manufacturing jobs just because they invited a new competitor to town.
Minister Jolly, who actually met with Honda executives in Japan and speaks frequently to Jamieson, strongly defends her policy. She explicitly stated, "We're not putting any businesses in jeopardy. I reject that premise." She argues that the government is simply trying to offer the best technology for Canadians while actively protecting 500,000 workers by increasing the manufacturing footprint in Canada. In fact, she even hinted that there might be some good news on the horizon for Honda's Alliston plant, though she declined to confirm if their EV production plans were officially back on track.
So, what does this all mean? We're going to end this explainer with a final, very precarious question. Will Canada's strict build where you sell mandate successfully secure a high-tech EV manufacturing future? Or will this bold strategy backfire, anger the legacy automakers who currently build 75% of the country's cars, and drive them away for good? The decisions made in the coming months are going to shape the automotive landscape and consumer choices for decades to come. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.